Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, no matter where in the world you are. I'm Caitlin Allen, the VP of Marketing at OpenComp, and I am your moderator for today. Like it or not, for those who are not familiar with OpenComp, over 3,000 of the world's fastest growing companies use our platform to get compensation intelligence that helps them effectively manage burn and dilution while they stay competitive to top talent. And that is the perfect segue for today's topic. You've probably seen many headlines recently about stocks and layoffs and hiring freezes. And so we wanted to put together a diverse panel for today to dive into how companies should operate and can operate smart financially and what critical missteps they should avoid. And so we've got a really rich panel that I will introduce you to in just a few seconds. Before I do that, though, in the chat, please introduce yourself, title, where you are, what role you're in, if you feel comfortable doing that. Sometimes people even share their LinkedIn profile URLs, a great way to create community and connect with each other. And this webinar is being recorded. You'll get it tomorrow. We'll also follow up next week with a guide that dives into the topics we're discussing today. And throughout the discussion, please put your opinions, good, bad, ugly, and your questions in the chat. I use it to guide the conversation. And sometimes we get wonderfully off topic because of what people want to hear about. Sometimes we stay on topic too. Getting in to introduce our speakers, we have a lineup of amazing experts and operators at growth companies. First, Stephanie Valenti, the Chief Revenue Officer at SmartBug, which is an amazing inbound agency I've personally been a customer of, so highly recommend. She has over 15 years of experience leading B2B sales and marketing organizations and operational departments, upwards of 50 to 500 team members globally. So really excited to hear from her. We also have Emily Downs, who is the head of HR at Hummingbird. Hummingbird is a platform that is specifically built for modern compliance teams to understand customers and collaborate with law enforcement. And she's joining us with nearly a decade of people experience at high growth companies like Ticketfly and Plaid. And last but not least, Erin Hannaford is a seasoned B2B marketer with B2B to C experience as well. Nearly 20 years of experience building and running marketing teams for high growth companies of all sizes, seeing some of them through acquisition and exit. And she currently runs growth marketing at OpenComp. Erin, Emily, Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Going to be great. So we're going to get into the discussion in just a hot second. We'll start with why we are here. As you can see on this slide, like I said earlier, there's a lot going on in the world, surprise to nobody. Investors are cutting back if you happen to be venture backed. We've seen lots of change in the stock market as well. If you happen to be a public company, many companies are hiring they're pausing their hiring. I read that instead of said it. And we've seen 51,000 layoffs so far this year. And Stephanie, why don't we just start with you? Is this the first economic turn you've been a part of? And what would you say about just economies in general these days?
Yeah, no, gosh, I wish, but no. I think that probably everybody on this call got to feel and experience the downturn from COVID. Maybe not if you're one of those niche industries, but we all had some changes there. And even before that with, stock market crashes and all of those different cyclicalities and even business. So I think a downturn can be outside of the economy, but maybe a product line all of a sudden becomes saturated with competition and is old and has to be replaced by different revenue, right? So lots of different things going on in the world with different organizations, with different competitive landscape, you name it. Lots of different downturns have been navigated throughout my career, for sure.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to dive into some of those lessons. And on that note, Emily, let's turn it over to you. How many downturns have you been a part of as an executive and as a member of the team? And maybe without going into specific strategies, because we'll get into those in a minute, but how have those experiences shaped how you and your executive team are currently viewing the one we're in right now?
I would say this specific one is the first one where I'm sitting at the executive team table. Previous ones I've had the pleasure and the burden maybe of being a people manager, HR business partner, an employee, the sole HR operator, where you kind of have to go through a little bit of trial and error depending on how big that downturn is. I think you made a really great point, Stephanie, right? It's not always the economy. Sometimes it's just what's happening with your specific business and the landscape there. And so it's been very, very helpful having the experience as boots on the ground, the business partner trying to be strategic and help other leaders, and now being kind of in this spot, partnering really, really closely with our other executives to navigate how to best address and work with our employees to keep them comfortable during this current situation.
Well, and I think that's such a valuable perspective that I'm glad is being represented today, right? Because the reason we manage is so that that people can have a effective, productive, dare I say, enjoyable experience at their company. So really glad that that perspective is represented here. Erin, I know you have been part of an economic downturn before. Can you share with us what your philosophy is for steering an organization through these kind of seasons?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having been through economic downturns as an employee and as a manager, it's really helped to shape my perspective on it, that transparency is the most important thing. It is critical for executives to be out in front of the messaging, because people are going to form their own opinions and their own perceptions, and left without information, those are going to be far worse than anything that is fact-based that leadership can share. And I think that creating that culture of transparency and sharing upfront just creates that sense of team, and that, especially in a growth environment, we're working together and we're going to weather this storm together.
I see some nods on the panel. What are thoughts?
Yeah, communication, transparency, and not making any promises. I think that's a big one too. Like, I've seen a lot of organizations where a CEO will come up and be like, we're going to weather the storm and no one's going to get laid off. And then like 2 months later, the business does continue to decline and they have to go forward with something they said they weren't going to do. And so really massaging that authentic message to, we know what's happening and here are some of the plans that we're going forward with to battle that. And I want you to be on this battlefield with me, or, some sort of analogy in that way is key, right? Really massaging the message. You never want to have to retract.
I couldn't agree more. I think also, Erin, what you said about employees, when there's no information, kind of starting to create their own narrative, a timely response is really, really important. Even if that response is, we're not totally sure what the future has to hold, but here's what you can expect to hear. Here's what and when you can expect to hear from us, to give employees that peace of mind that you're working on it and there is a plan in place and that you have their best interest in mind.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that point, it's not a one-time communication. Like this is an ongoing thing. So ongoing conversations make a lot of sense too. What in terms of just transitioning to lessons from the past seasons of economic downturn or recession or whatever that we've all been a part of, what are common beliefs that the general populace has about how to respond to an economy? And then Stephanie, we can start with you, that you disagree with. What would you say are wrong beliefs?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that everybody does when they come into an unanticipated downturn is, do we go reforecast? And when you reforecast, you have to look at not only the top line, but you have to look at your expenses, right? And so the first thing that I see a lot of people do, especially some of those partners of sales and even HR, right, is go to that sales and marketing line and they want to slash it. because it's usually one of the biggest expenses outside of the people line. And so they're like, that's a perfect place we can reduce. We're not in contracts there, right? Maybe we don't need that. And I just want to scream every time somebody says that, right? Because if you want to continue propelling growth, you have to invest in it. There's no efficiency metric out there where all of a sudden we're just going to be more efficient because we trained our people, so now we can hit a bigger number. Like, that's such a fail in forecasting methodology. And so yeah, like, don't cut your investment for growth, because then what's going to happen in 2023? Right? You're going to have to be starting all over with a dry pipeline. So that's usually the thing that I look at. And then of course the people line, right? You have to be prepared, but you also have to think fast forward, right, to 2023, and not just for today. So really thinking, are we going to get the same talent back if we have to do layoffs? What is that going to look like? What's that timeline going to look like? Is everybody be doing that at the same time? So is our time to fill going to, you know, go through the roof, and then we can get that talent back? So really just paying attention and thinking forward, and not just in the day.
Emily and Erin, what about you all?
To maybe make a meta point, I think the thing people often assume is you need to react and respond. And I think taking note of what's happening is really important, and factoring in everything that's going on is very important, but making an immediate reaction or responding immediately, usually, kind of to Stephanie's point, sets you up for a very short-sighted action that may end up putting you in a deeper hole than you were bound to be in. And so I think really the reaction that you should be taking is, okay, what are these possible outcomes? What do these future scenarios look like? And what are the true friction points that we need to figure out, unearth, to make some of those decisions? So instead of just seeing that maybe other companies are making layoffs, or this investment in marketing, is it really worth it? Well, take a beat to look at the data and understand, okay, what are the risks and positives to those investments that we currently have, and what is the actual friction point in which we know that this is something that we would need to pause or lessen our investment in. So I think it's not a panic react.
I agree, Emily. I think it's making a best case scenario plan, middle of the road plan, and worst case scenario plan, and being prepared to react, but not reacting too quickly.
Yes, I would agree with that. And then also revisiting it consistently. Like the data that we have this month is very different than what we were seeing back in May. So it's important to iteratively do that. Okay, so let's get into the present day and how we're all negotiating the present. Erin, what KPIs are top of mind for our leadership team and CEO right now?
You know, we are making a shift as a growth company that's fairly early on, that you know, had the unique position of saying we're early, we're building our user base, we're not focused on a dollar value as a bottom line, to really shifting to much more of a revenue generating mindset. We are, you know, making decisions about what spend is working and what spend isn't. We are very focused on ROI and what are we getting for everything, right? So I would say that from the start, we have been a data-driven company, and that has just intensified, right? Mm-hmm. That we're looking at as many metrics as possible, and assessing the change in metrics week over week, month over month, and tying those back to the plan. The metrics that matter most, you know, in a growth company are oftentimes changing and in flux. So I think the more we're looking at, the better.
Stephanie, what are you all doing?
So definitely paying really close attention to our SQLs on a different level. Like, we are double clicking in to see where they, like, what industries, what trends are we seeing within those industries? So really paying a lot of attention there. And then also some of the things you normally see within any time of economic response is deal velocity changes, right? So really paying attention to how fast is a deal moving through your funnel, because usually, I mean, you have a pretty strong metric there. You know exactly how long it's going to take from start to finish on average. And with economic changes, that is one of the first things that slows down. So paying attention to that and focusing on how can we help these organizations drive that forward in a time that's a little bit uncertain, right?
Mhm.
So those are two big ones. And then also just product, like deep diving into what product is still relevant across the board. And for us, that's services, where I'm at today. But that's something I've always seen, is how do you pivot quickly to make sure you're addressing the needs of the market at the time?
Yeah. Yeah. So greater scrutiny on revenue and ROI, greater scrutiny on target audience and the go-to-market,
Yes.
and just overall cost in general.
Yeah.
Emily, before I move on to the next question, would you add anything to the KPI question? Is your CEO or exec team looking at something outside of what we've spoken about?
I think we're looking at all the same things, and we're looking at kind of our time to velocity, right? So how long it takes to get a customer up and onboarded. And that's one that I think we've been working on for a while, but now we're realizing, in addition to how those kind of sales cycles are changing, varying in timeline, the onboard time is, and getting people up and running is one that we've realized we have a lot of control over. And so that's where we're trying to put our energy into those areas where we do have control on the outcomes.
Makes sense. As we get into some of these tactics, specifically, let's poll the audience first to hear from you, the listener, about what your companies are doing to cut costs and accelerate revenue to extend runway. The options that you'll see span some of what we just talked about, right? Like adjusting the product roadmap, going to new audiences. Some folks are reducing budget for new hires. Some people are cutting staff or cutting their workforce. We've also, something that we've done internally is bring a lot of our contractor support internally. So, some of our team has even gone outside of their traditional job description role to do additional things, like the event marketing manager is helping us with design and a couple other things. Our content manager is now doing a little bit more writing and so on and so forth. So we'll wrap this poll up and then look at what the results are. To all over the board, which makes sense. I think probably the most notable to me is that there's not many, none of the aboves. We're all doing a bit of A/B testing on strategies, it appears. And then greatest representation is budget reduction that doesn't relate to headcount, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and some compensation strategies related to that, and then also reducing agency and contractor support. So great. Okay, let's talk as a group in terms of increasing retention, right? So as our focus shifts from or to cash conservation and extending runway, there's sometimes implications, which we'll talk about in a minute, for staff size and for staff reduction. Sometimes it's just a matter of pausing new hires. But regardless, what we hear from a lot of our customers is that companies are laser focused on, how do I keep my top performers? And sometimes it's managing folks out that maybe should have been managed out anyways, but really focused on that focal review period coming up this year. Emily, we'll start with you because this is such an area of expertise for you. Where are your team's heads at in terms of retention, and how are you thinking about leaning into making that a priority and operationalizing it?
So we are just finishing up a quarterly performance check-in, which we had kind of been talking about before the economy started to shake things up for us. And the goal with that was to get a quarterly cadence in where, I think everyone on this call is probably familiar with the once or twice a year performance review that takes you hours and hours and hours. And we wanted to get something a little bit more manageable and frequent so that at those larger cycles, it's not quite as time intensive. And the huge benefit that we are seeing coming out of this kind of quarterly check-in is we're getting those conversations going on a more frequent basis, where our top performers and maybe even our mid to high potential performers are getting that recognition and encouragement and structure and guidance to give them a clear path of like, this is what you need to do to get to that next level. And here's where you're knocking it out of the park. And so those conversations are just creating that feeling of belonging and retention within the company, and are setting the stage for really, really great kind of recognition and merit cycles towards the end of the year. The other thing, which may not always come to mind for folks, is as we are going through our open enrollment this coming fall, we're looking very, very closely at the benefits we offer and how we can make those a lot more competitive. Benefits, HR, I will just always advocate, these are huge and expensive part of your total compensation. And when you start to really factor in what your health insurance covers, what those different, maybe those work from home perks or financial wellness perks include, that is a really, really key component of employee retention. And it's something that we are taking a very, very close look at as how can we use those dollars for maximum impact and maximum employee experience.
And is, in terms of maximizing those dollars, is that a function of changing the benefits and or communicating them better to employees?
It's a little bit of both, and I won't get into the nitty gritty, but depending on your kind of employee population, the cost can really, really fluctuate. And so it's being really, really strategic about what are the health insurance plans that you are constructing and putting together, and what kind of population are you optimizing for? And then how can you really, really educate your employee base on how to use those so that they maximize those benefits, which also generally reduces costs for the employer. So building a nice ongoing education component, but also doing a little bit of an overhaul to really ensure that we're getting the best bang for our buck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Stephanie, you manage sales, compensation, and variable comp is obviously a very big piece of that part of the organization. What does retention look like through that lens, which I believe is a team you're currently directly managing right now, and then also just for the rest of your organization?
Yeah. So I've been with my current organization for about 6 months. And back to the question that you asked, Emily, like we were originally in the heat of the Great Resignation, we had a lot of movement, quite a bit of movement. And so we have been doing a ton for the last, I want to say 9 months, everything from roundtables to have conversations with the CEO and the founders to understand what works, what doesn't, what they want, those listening sessions, and all the way through. So we proactively made a lot of moves, right? We increased salaries to make sure that we were up to par with the right salary bands. We relooked at variable compensation, and this all happened Q4 last year. And so as we came into this year, right now we're starting to look at, is it working, right? Are we keeping and retaining our employees and our top employees? And the answer is yes. Like we have seen a drastic change in employee engagement, in employee satisfaction, and of course those retention and attrition numbers. So I think we've done that. And a big piece was just understanding what people were looking for, what they wanted. Was it benefits, or was it base salary, or was it variable, right? I do manage multiple variable compensation packages and build them, and have done that for years. And it's always based on behaviors. So what behaviors are you trying to drive? And if the economy is taking a downturn and you need to drive a different behavior because you're pushing on a different, we're pushing on a different product, or you're pushing into a cost savings or driving margin, then you need to relook at your variable comp plans, right? Because you are driving behaviors through the way that you pay variable. And so
Right.
A lot of people forget that. They forget, oh, I made this strategy change, I kept my comp plan the same. Why are they not listening to me, right? You're not incentivizing them correctly. So
Yes.
That's always been a big piece.
Well, and I think what's really important about what really is really important that underscores what you just said is the fact that a compensation program or strategy, right? It reflects both the philosophy of the company of how it wants to pay, as well as its financials, right? What's coming in the future, what the potential scenarios could look like. And in theory, a company should have the ability to do that planning in a way that they can sustain as the company scales up and scales down. And I think a lot of what we've seen with these layoffs publicly, in public companies mostly, is kind of what Glossier's CEO admitted early on this year of just like, hey, we didn't do a good job planning our hiring plan. Like we got over our skis. And so there's a lot of science that can go into that, to your point. Erin, turning the tables to you, same topic. How are we thinking about retention, both, through a softer skills kind of perspective? That's not quite the right phrase, but you get what I mean. And then also more of a tactical lens through comp.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Stephanie's point of about the Great Resignation and now shifting into a economic uncertainty is interesting because as a people manager, a year ago you were thinking, how am I keeping my top talent because it's going to be hard to replace them because I have to be super competitive in this crazy job market, to now I'm thinking, if I lose some of my top talent, I might lose the budget for that headcount. And right, so it's a different rationale behind the mindset, but the same mindset, I think. And I go back to transparency being really important, having really open conversations with team members, understanding what they feel positive about, what they feel negative about, where they see themselves going, what their growth path looks like. And we do that regularly through, weekly check-ins and candid conversations with direct line managers, to more structured, quarterly and biannually check-ins. We have an executive team that makes themselves incredibly available and, wants to be connected with the team. And then I think that, some of the other things that we're doing is from the start, from the very first conversation we have with a potential employee, we share our compensation philosophy, and we're very transparent about that. We share what we pay and the rationale behind it. That way there's no surprises. And when we get to the point of making someone an offer, they know the full range of the role that they're joining, so they know there's potential for growth within the role as well.
Yeah, that's really well said. The quarterly business, pardon me, that we also have a quarterly or a monthly business review, but the quarterly review process that Erin's talking about it's been something that we found super delightful across the company, where you ask for feedback from other people, they send it via email, you put it in a doc, the manager summarizes the glows and grows. And then you do it in a regular, like kind of one-on-one environment. I think it takes me probably like 90 minutes total for each person. It's really been fabulous because it's not only giving them consistent feedback, but that we make space for 360 for the manager, the team, and the company. And I know I am hungry for that. So it's been really nice. Just sharing that little tidbit that Erin and I have worked on together on our team. So Erin, you spoke about compensation philosophy. That's a fluffy term for some on this call, maybe. It basically just means it's a statement of how you are going to pay your people, and why. And so getting into compensation and headcount planning, Emily, have you all changed the market percentile you guys are trying to pay at? Have you changed your compensation philosophy or your strategy at all? What does headcount planning look like for you guys right now?
So we have not changed our compensation philosophy. We have a very kind of structured compensation philosophy where we really offer folks, two offers. We don't negotiate. We are really trying to anchor our compensation from a really, really equitable place. And so we have a cash heavy offer and an equity heavy offer, and it's up to the candidate to pick which one fits their needs best. But everyone in the same role has the same two options. So we have I think that has made maybe forecasting a little bit easier, just to know what those either cash heavy or equity heavy could look like long-term. Where we've really kind of honed in is on the headcount planning. And what we've done is we do tend to check in on headcount planning, regularly, just to make sure we're growing as we need and as the business needs. But with the current economic climate, we have really taken a closer lens on what are these high priority roles and what is the prioritization stack ranking of what we are hiring for. And as we kind of look to the future and the current state, we knew we needed a lot of that focus on our go-to-market teams and those growth teams. So we reshuffled the prioritization for kind of the back half of the year to have the must-haves and then the nice-to-haves, with a lot of those growth roles being up in that must-haves bucket, because we know that marketing and sales will build us that longer runway going forward in the future.
That makes sense. Stephanie, how are you all adjusting in the similar ways?
It's interesting. So in prior roles in my life, yes, that would have been the answer, right? I would have done plan A, plan B, and even had a plan C, and it would have all been headcount based. And we even would have done 9-box review at the executive table, because it's very interesting to have those conversations when you think someone's a top performer, but the perception is they're not, right? So I always really advocate for that executive talent review. But in the business I'm in today, headcount planning is demand planning. Right. So our headcount is our cost, is our good, right? Like it's services. And so it's very different. It's been a really nice experience for me to jump into, coming from manufacturing, where I was actually doing and leading demand planning, to now, that is the same formula, right? For people planning. And so we're watching, we're not holding back on any headcount right now. Now, one thing we did put in place is generally I would let all of my leaders push out requisitions as needed. And just for that extra lens, we are doing some different approval routing, so that we're paying attention to, is the headcount in line with the revenue line, right? Because that's what we're looking at. And are we looking ahead at pipeline and how long it is to fill, right? It's a mathematical formula on our side.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Erin, what about you?
I have to say, Stephanie, I love what you just said about your demand plan is your people plan. That, as a marketer, that one really resonated.
Yeah, only so many hours in the day, right?
Yeah, yes. Yes. I don't know that our overall headcount plan has changed much versus just being really prudent about making a case for the hires that we need as part of our overall growth plan, and going back to that, having a plan, current plan, middle of the road plan, worst case plan. What do those things look like? How does that impact hiring? How does that impact spending? And I think that we've stuck pretty close to that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, last question on tactics, everybody, and then we'll kind of look forward to the future. We're probably all aware, audience included, of new pay transparency legislation that is cropping up in different states, right? It's in effect in Colorado, where I am. It's, I think is just new in New York and Seattle. And so there's this new lens, right, for us, particularly in the HR field or people field, to think through the lens of pay ranges and being transparent about them with their organizations. Emily, how much of a part of the economy discussion are ranges these days?
It's a big part. And I think, candidly, the ranges piece is where our leadership team has talked about, should we move from this really, really structured kind of offer and compensation philosophy that we have to leverage ranges to give ourselves a little bit more flexibility in terms of cash and equity spend. Our recruiting leader, head of recruiting, and I have been kind of keeping a good pulse on the different laws that crop up at different times and when those are impacted. And I think candidly, we have just been really, really lucky to have the structured compensation approach and to be remote first. So a lot of our approach has kind of met that lowest common denominator threshold. Where that is something that like we talk about a lot is really as we think about our upcoming compensation cycles and knowing that this really structured compensation philosophy is really, really great for equitability across the team, but how do you factor in reward and merit? And as you grow a team and you really consider going from across the US to global, how do you maintain a sense of equitability, factor in not only the US and state specific compensation laws, but those Europe compensation laws? And how do we really, really think about giving our employees the same access to that information as we would candidates? And that's a really, really challenging problem. And so it's a challenging education component. And so where we have kind of shaken out on it is as we think about our compensation philosophy evolving and going through larger merit and recognition cycles towards the end of this year, we're really focused on education. How can we educate employees to understand this is what equity means? This is how salary works. This is how compensation is fair. Compensation is rarely fair at a point in time. It is always fair over a period of time. And this is how we think about it based on tenure. And this is how we think about it based on role. And so we are really leaning into the education component because we feel really comfortable that we are meeting kind of those laws that are coming about, but we know that that doesn't always match up to how employees feel. And so we're leaning a lot more on the education component. But it is definitely something that's top of mind because compensation, as everyone here knows, is a incredibly personal and sensitive part of an employee's experience at their job.
It is. And it's also, this is something I wasn't totally aware of until I started self-educating on this topic, but it's something that so much informs your financial plan because your headcount plan is based on pay ranges.
Yep.
Right. So there's this legal side, there's this deeply emotional, psychological side for employees. And then there's this hardcore financial aspect of it because of, just the input, I guess. Stephanie, same question for you.
Yeah, transparently, I struggle with this a little bit. I grew up in this like very stringent, like corporate Fortune 100 environment where it's always been like a huge no-no, right? To share compensation or to talk about compensation. And so I'm having to break my like taught thought process that's happened for years and years to get myself comfortable with what's coming. Because if you're taught forever, right, that's something that you just don't do, and now you have to lead through it, it takes you a minute, right? So I'm trying to educate myself, and I love what you said, Emily, about education being that main point of that's how you win, right, is teaching people the why and explaining the thought behind it. One of the things that we've done recently at SmartBug is we brought in a VP of people. They started on, this week. They started this week on Monday. It's still this week. They started on Monday, and we knew as an organization we had to elevate there, right? Our business is people and services, and there are a lot of things coming down the chain, and we are global. We do have people that are outside of the United States, and how do we keep on trend and make sure that we're following policy and process? And so it's being reviewed. We don't do that today, right? It's not something that is a part of our policy and process, but we know that it needs to be soon.
Erin, I know you have already kind of alluded to the fact that we share pay ranges in the interview process. I also know ranges have been top of mind for both of us because of the free range builder product that we just launched, which shameless plug for the audience. You can build them in 3 clicks for free. And then if you sign up now, you get our headcount plan product for free as well. But anything you'd add to this topic?
I would, just share a little bit about having built out a team here where we are transparent about this is the way we pay and why that, when it comes to ranges and numbers, I have found that when I start the initial conversation with any candidate, that the number I share is is the number that is directly in line with our compensation plan, right? So we pay at the midpoint. So the number that I give is the midpoint. I don't give a range until I'm actually at the point where we're talking to the candidate that we want to move forward with, and I'm sharing a range to show that there's growth potential. I think it's human nature that when you hear a low number and a high number, you're going to gravitate to the high number and expect the high number. So I have found not starting with the range, but starting with the specific has been more successful.
Darn human nature.
Yeah.
Oh, great. All right. So we've got 2 more rapid fire final questions, folks, and we're going to do a poll right before we get to them. To understand if the audience plans to make any substantive changes to headcount plan in the next 6 months, whether that's a freeze or a reduction or anything else. So we'll give a few minutes while that happens. Of the folks on the call, have any of us, I know OpenComp has not, have any of us had staff reductions? I see shakes of heads.
No.
And then it sounds like we've all revisited our hiring plans, that there's still some hiring going on, but it might look a little bit different than it did prior to the economy turning. So that makes sense. Let's see what the audience, how they align with us at all. So some freeze on hiring, reducing new hires, kind of the same thing. Yeah. All goes into good planning, doesn't it? All right. So then looking forward to the next 3 to 6 months, Erin, what is the number one thing that what is that? July, August, September, October. So October to January, what are you going to have implemented that's most important to you?
I think much more comprehensive reporting that shows where our spend is working and where it isn't at a much deeper level than we're looking at today. So we can make better decisions about spend and about what we're able to generate to put us in a place to successfully forecast for 2023.
Emily.
I'm most excited about the benefits refresh we're doing. It's going to come with like a lot of really great education, which we've kind of started making a month-over-month plan for. And I will just geek out on it. I think it's really, really valuable. What we've seen already this year in tandem with the economic climate and volatility is also that people are becoming a lot more aware of healthcare and the other fringe benefits that contribute to their wellness and their lifestyle. And so I think candidly, I'm really most excited about our benefits overhaul and education, but very specifically with compensation, we're looking at how we can start getting our compensation program operationalized. We are Series B, and we've had most of our folks who are starting to hit their 1 year. And so that's really the time where you need to start recognizing and rewarding folks and getting something really structured in place to kind of bring people along, and so that their compensation growth and recognition matches that career growth. So those are probably the 2 things that we are going to be putting a lot of energy into.
Love it. And I, by the way, love it when I ask for one thing, people give me more than that. So way to go, you. Stephanie, apart from hitting target for the year, which I'm sure is number 1, what are the other things?
Yeah, so I run sales, marketing, and all of our operations and delivery departments. And so I think something that's really important right now is keeping a pulse on the market and making sure that we're flexible enough to pivot on in moments notice, right? So we've always been really well known for being that HubSpot partner and inbound marketing with these supplements, but how do I add on a bunch of other services as needed based on what the market's doing? And so lots of flexibility and fast pivot. What's hard about that is that we are at a point where they brought me into scale, right? So we're in scalability mode where we're building processes and making everything efficient. And then it's like, oh, well, just kidding. Like, let's also make sure we're flexible. And so really kind of balancing those two things is important. As far as more of like, if I put my old HR hat back on, we did have this new VP, right, of people come in, and I'm stoked about what she's going to do for the organization from an elevation and scaling standpoint with our people. We do a lot of great like employee development plans and things like that, but how can we continue to elevate that as we grow to make sure that it's scalable for us? And I think that she's the person to really help us drive that home. So really looking forward to that.
It's really exciting. I feel like we'll have to have some kind of like meetup in 6 months and check in for all of us. We are going to do one last poll, seeing how folks are going to be changing the market percentile that they're paying at for their company. And then we'll transition to the last question, and maybe we can start asking the last question while people are taking the poll. So obviously OpenComp compensation company. So if you had a magic wand, and we'll start with you, Stephanie, just as we ended with you last, what would compensation look like for you or your team or your company in a way that it doesn't right now?
This is so hard, right? So like, if I think about the entire organization, I would go back to exactly what the topic of pay transparency was with Emily and Erin. Like we do it, but not in the way that it's going, right? Not in the whole programmatic, open conversation, transparent way that the world is telling people that we need to do it. And so we need to get on board and we need to figure that out. And so the magic wand would be that we almost take something out of your book there, Emily, and our new VP of People probably has a similar thought, right? But where we're educating our teams today, so that when we do roll this out, that the teams are excited and it's not a distraction. As an operator, right, and a revenue leader, I don't want it to be a distraction. I want it to help us continue to propel our growth. And so starting early, that would probably be a magic wand. No distractions, everyone's happy, right? And we're compliant. And so, and doing the right thing, right? So I think that is important. So that would probably be it. As far as variable compensation goes, continuing to make sure that we're flexible and we pivot and educate the team around, if we're pivoting for flexibility, that I had a magic wand to make sure OTE stayed the same, but that we could, adjust based on strategy and direction of the market.
Yeah, well, and it does need to check all those boxes: the compliance, the human element, the financial element. Very good point.
Yeah.
And I think that's traditionally been very hard, right? Because the data is siloed, it lives in spreadsheets, we're dangerously manual. And then like the people that actually activate comp, the people managers, right? They don't have the training or the tools necessarily to do that right. Emily, what would you say through your expert lens?
I think pay transparency is a pretty big like table stakes. So to go one step further and maybe to not beat a dead horse on the like benefits and that component, I think there's a really interesting factor that team members on variable comp fully understand the work they need to do to earn or out earn whatever their compensation is. I think that is something that would be, if I could wave my magic wand, employees would understand how compensation works. And so almost like pay transparency, and it's structured in an understandable way of, if I do X, or here's roughly what those kind of salary ranges or bands look like and how you move through them, that would be kind of that icing on the cake to pay transparency.
A comp IQ almost,
yes.
Raising a comp IQ. That makes sense. Erin, what about you?
So, you said it, Caitlin, our business is compensation. So I look at this question and I think a little broader than just my role or our company, but I think, my magic one would be for compensation practices in general. And I think that it would be that this conversation continues, right? And that, right now we've got a number of states that are forcing legislation on it, but that companies start moving towards compensation best practices without being legally forced to, right? And that businesses see the benefit of being transparent, of having a clearly communicated approach and plan, and employees then benefit from that, and the employer-employee relationship starts off on the right foot and only grows from there.
And I think the numbers tell that story really well. Specifically, I think there's 3.3 billion workers in the world, right? And $40 trillion every year spent on compensation. And yet it is this area of excessively distorted decisions, right? And so to bring data science to it is a mission that obviously inspires us. On that note, ladies, thank you so much. This has been fabulous. We're going to close out with one last slide and we'll wrap up for the day. There is no question that OpenComp can help you with some of what we've talked about today. Not everything, clearly, but our platform is designed to help you benchmark your pay, then design expert programs in a compensation studio that's fully integrated and updated in real time, and then activating those insights with your managers in the field. And if you sign up today for the platform, you'll get access to Range Builder for free, where you can build pay ranges in 3 clicks, and they're expert grade. And then that feeds directly into a headcount plan, which helps you model those financial scenarios for your company. So that's what you see here on this slide. Thank you so much for spending your day with us, and speakers, thank you for sharing your expertise. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and look forward to seeing you in the coming months.
Thank you.
Thank you.